We're now entering the period of late Empire in Roman history, and for our purposes, that's going to be the 3rd century and the 4th century, or at least a portion thereof. It's a period when two things become worse. The first is the problems on the borders. When more and more people attempt to make their way into Roman territory, we're going to discuss these folks later in terms of migrations. For the Romans, they viewed these intruders as barbarians, which is simply a term referencing them as outsiders, as foreigners, and as not Romans. And also, therefore, of course, it carries the implication that they're inferior to the Romans. It required a lot of work, soldiers, and resources to go to the borders to protect the empire. This was a constant drain on Rome. In addition to that, it was also a period in the 3rd century and the 4th century of increased political instability at home, and that is in particular going to reference an increase in the number of assassinations. When you have this much going on in your political system, it will influence the art. It will certainly influence the way in which people feel about themselves, about their country, and about their rulers. And that does show up in this rather astonishing image, figure 763 in our textbook, of one of the 3rd century emperors. His name is Caracalla. The image that you have on the left is the one that's in the book. I suspect that this is part of originally a full figure, which would have shown Caracalla as a heroic nude, yet with a face that is recognizable in terms of our emperor. I have next to it a head of Caracalla. It's a fragment which comes from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I would like you to know that one as well because it's close and you actually have an opportunity to see it. In both of these images, as you look at them, they're drastically different from the way in which emperors were portrayed previously. If we were in the classroom right now, I would be asking you if you thought Caracalla was a nice man. And I think as you look at these two images, your answer would be no. According to tradition, he and his brother Geta were called to the bedside of their dying father, who also was emperor. And the father, who wished both sons to rule together, said to them, "Cooperate with each other, pay the soldiers, and hate everyone else." To secure his own power, the first thing that Caracalla did was to have Geta, his brother, murdered, followed by having his memory damned. In addition to that, he had 20,000 of Geta's supporters put to death also, in an effort to consolidate his own power. That's not all, folks. He also had his own wife and his father-in-law murdered because he also viewed them as threats to his power and to his authority. We can safely say then, Caracalla was not a nice man. His depiction is also vastly different from that of earlier emperors. He is shown as a figure who is ruthless, is calculating, and there's a chilling quality of brutality associated with this image. He turns his head to the side, and as the textbook suggests, that might have been intended to convey power and authority. And think again, this is a standing statue. But at the end of the day, what it does is suggest suspicion and to some extent perhaps fear of an assassin coming to get him. The message being conveyed is, I know you're coming for me, but I'm going to get you before you get me. This is a piece then that is chilling to the bone in terms of conveying the brutal nature of an emperor who would do anything to keep himself alive and to hold on to power. He seems to be scowling, and as the book points out, I think you can see it in the Met piece, there's almost an X that runs through the features of Caracalla's face, and what that does is to intensify the scowl, and along with it, a sense of suspicion, maybe verging on paranoia. The image also has changed dramatically. I'd like you to look particularly at the piece in the Met for this discussion, because it references future changes that are going to occur in Roman art. The incisions on the beard, the beard and the mustache. It's easiest for us to see the mustache on the face of Caracalla, as well as the hair, and I'm talking about the one on the far right particularly. They're quick and they're shallow, and it suggests that the artist is working rather rapidly, without concern for the intense qualities of naturalism that had been a part of the past. What we're starting to see is a simplification of form and a rejection of the tradition of naturalism, something that had begun in the ancient world by the early Greeks. Two views of the piece in the Met that perhaps will give you a greater sense of the intensity of the emotion that's being conveyed by this piece. And let me just take a moment to tell you how this story ends up. Caracalla does succeed in remaining alive and in office for approximately 6 years, during which time he does function as emperor. But during that time, he seems to become increasingly unstable, and I hesitate to use the word paranoid because there was also always justification of being afraid while you were an emperor because you were at risk. But in the case of Caracalla, it probably caused his own death. He went to visit an Egyptian fortune teller or seer, and this was something that most emperors did, so this is not unusual. The guy's name was Serapio, and Serapio predicted that Caracalla would be killed by Macrinus, who was a prefect in the Praetorian Guard of Caracalla. In other words, in Caracalla's inner circle. Well, a normal person would probably react in a cautionary way. That's not what Caracalla did, however. He didn't like his fortune, so he simply took the fortune teller and threw him to the lions, as if out of anger to get rid of the possibility in the future. To make matters worse, and I think to scare Caracalla even more, Serapio lives. He survives the assault by the lions, so Caracalla then simply has him summarily executed. From this point forward, he begins to watch Macrinus. He intercepts his dispatches, he has spies looking at what he's doing, and of course Macrinus is going to pick up on this, realize what's happening, understand that his own life is in danger, and consequently, Macrinus will be responsible for the assassination of Caracalla, and Caracalla will be stabbed to death, ending his reign as emperor. The image that we have on the right represents part of the story of Caracalla and the damnation of his brother's memory. We are going to have that as part of an assignment, so I'm going to ask you to take a look at it there, but I would like you also to check it out in the textbook. Caracalla's image was created in the first quarter of the 3rd century. Images and political realities are going to change rapidly in the 3rd century, and by the time we get to the middle of it, which is when this was carved, you're almost going to be surprised at the appearance of the face of the new emperor. This is Trajan Decius, and Trajan Decius was one of the soldier emperors. After the murder of the last Severan leader, and that's going to be the line of Caracalla, essentially, which occurs in the year 235, civil war is going to be the norm. It's going to be shaping politics and our worldview in Rome. At this point in time, power really fell to the military, and the military is represented most forcefully by the Roman legions. It's going to be the legionnaires, the soldiers, who pick from among themselves generals to rule. But one after another, these generals are assassinated because another general wants to be in charge of the Roman empire. This is Trajan Decius, and he is one of those soldier emperors. He's found figure 767 in our textbook, and he is going to reign. The little letter R, and I've got his dates right here, references the period that an individual is a ruler or reigns over a country. And in this case, the country's Rome, and the reigning dates or ruling dates are 249 to 251, which actually is pretty impressive in this period of assassination and chaos. So Trajan Decius is actually lasting longer than a number of other Roman emperors will last. It is an amazing change in the image, though. Take a look at the face. It conveys 3rd century verism, and I said 3rd century verism because it's not as naturalistic as the veristic images that we saw in the Republic. So it combines a kind of truth with abstraction. We continue to move towards shortcuts and towards bolder forms and perhaps even deeper cutting on the surface, following more or less what we began with the image of Caracalla. We are moving towards simplification of the form, and also I put up here a terrible truth, that our emperors are tired. They're old, and they know that they're not able to keep control, that chaos is going to reign in the Roman world as it slowly moves towards a decline. So what happens to Trajan Decius, because he did seem to be a bit better of a soldier emperor than some of the rest? Well, he's going to do something smart. He's going to put his son in as a co-ruler, which reduces the incentive to kill him. But unfortunately, both of them are going to be killed in a battle that is against one of the barbarian tribes, and that particular tribe is the Goths, allowing the Roman Empire then to fall into the hands of yet another soldier emperor. This is an example showing the full figure of that statue of Trajan Decius on the left, and I've got it up against one of the details of Augustus. I just want you to recall the incredible difference between these two images. Augustus returning to the Greeks as a source of inspiration, showing himself as almost infallible because he is youthful, perfect, and also, of course, divine. Whereas the 3rd century emperor is a very mortal-looking human being, imperfect, and without the authority of, and without the certainty that Augustus is displaying.